Hi guys, my name is Kirsty and welcome back to Upside Down Books. Today we're going to be doing the exciting task of revisiting 2021 and seeing how my reading year went.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso, notte giorno di
So to do this, I'm going to sort of methodically go through a few different elements and aspects of 2021 through my goals and what I actually achieved, and talk about how I felt about the year. And I think I want to start with that at the very first and foremost thing. How did I feel 2021 went? I could not be happier is the short answer. I had a phenomenal reading year. I bested my all-time record, both in terms of page count and book count, and I read some fantastic books, read books that I really loved. I discovered some new interests and got into different genres, and so I've just had a really great time with books last year, and it's got me so excited for what I'm going to read in 2022. The main thing we need to address is my Goodreads reading goal, and did I meet it? What did I set? If you recall, back this time last year, I was setting myself goals to read 65 books on Goodreads, and I was secretly hoping to hit 75, but I didn't want to put myself under too much pressure. I had a pretty rough reading month in April, having read about six or so books in January, March, February, March, that sort of time. I then had a horrific run with books and only finished 2 books in April, and I thought that was me done for and that I wasn't going to have a good reading month, because having a whole month where I read so few books puts a massive dent into my total count for the year. It also just took me out of my game. It meant I had to spend a couple months ramping it back up and getting into a good reading mindset, but thankfully May was my birthday month where I had a special TBR and was reading a lot of books that I was really keen to read. So I did manage to claw it back, and in the end I finished on 88 books for the year. And you already know that if you've watched my wrap up, but I was so impressed by that because I managed to squeeze in just a few extra books in December that meant that I bested my all-time record, which I set in 2016 of 85 books. And I was honestly at the point where I was thinking I will never read that many again, and that 50 books was the easiest amount for me to read. Over the last few years, I have been reading anywhere between 50 and 70 books at a push, and so I really didn't think that I would be able to improve my reading. But one trend I have noticed when I look back on my reading goals, because I've been doing this since 2013, is that reading seems to be a lot like physical fitness, and I guess it is brain training in its own right. So the more I read and the more consistently I read, the more I read over time, and my reading goals and what I actually read for the year seem to improve the more consistent I am. And I can see for times when I've been traveling abroad for a lot of a year or something like that, where it's really gone down, or if I've had a particularly bad year for mental health or something like this, and the reading's gone down again and then picked back up, and it doesn't just recover to that high point again. It seems to be putting in a lot of effort to build up again. And so yeah, it's been really exciting to see that positive trend continue into 2021, and for me to hit 88 books, and it's certainly got me very ambitious about how that trend will continue into the next year. I'm hoping for more. It's been a lifelong goal of mine to read 100 books, because whenever I've seen other people hit 100 books or more in a year, I can't believe it's possible until I do it myself, is sort of what I feel in my mind. So I'm pretty close now. I was only 12 books off, so it's no longer an impossibility. So that's got me really excited that I managed to hit that goal. I then want to go over with you what my tracking was like in my bullet journal. So I mentioned many times throughout the year that I was tracking my reading in a bullet journal last year, and I had so much fun doing it. So I had a spread like this, and I've had to add some additional pages as I've gone on because I ran out of room, but I'll just show you the main spreads. So I've got all the little books, and this is pretty common, where you write in the book title as you read them, and then you color coordinate them as to your rating. So this was one spread that I had going, and I do rate my books reasonably high. I'm pretty well known for that. So there's a lot of pinks and yellows, which are the 5 and 4 star read books. I then had a little overview on this page. I was tracking my Goodreads goal up to 65 here, and I was coloring in segments as I went along, and obviously I well and truly surpassed that. I then had books per month and page count per month, and I actually find this really interesting to track independently to see how you go. I read some huge page counts in a few months, particularly in, when was that? July and December. I read close to 4,000 pages, which is absolutely mammoth. I read about 34,000 pages all up this year, which is huge. Most I've ever done before that was 28,000, so it was a much bigger win on page counting rather than book counts. And you can see my little slumpy month in April where I was just DNFing after DNF. It was awful. I then got over the next spread, I've got my series tracker. So I've got all the names of the series down here and then little squares to colour in with book one being on the edge and then going into however many books there were, to see how I went with the progress of the series, and that went on to the following page as well. You can pretty much tell that I did a reasonably bad job with continuing series, and I hope to do better in 2022. That's probably something I was most disappointed about. I'm not very good with continuing series, but we will see what next year brings. I then have my little poo tracker. That sounds terrible out of context. I've got my Winnie the Pooh tracker here, which is just my best books for each month. So for January I had Why We Broke Up. I thought that was brilliant, well worth the read if you haven't read it. And February I had Daughter of the Siren Queen, which is the sequel to Daughter of the Pirate King. March was Mercurial, which is a not so well known fantasy novel, but it was brilliant. April was Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. That was amazing. May was The Starless Sea, phenomenal book, can't recommend enough. June was Dial A for Aunties, that gave me so many good laughs. July was The Good Wife of Bath, which I just could not give high enough praise for. August was After Story, which is Australian First Nations author and story, which was very, very good. September was The Rose Code, one of my top 5 for the year, an excellent historical fiction. October was Raybearer, which is an African-inspired fantasy series, which is just so good and so original. November was Cloud Cuckoo Land, a brilliant new release, and in December was What the Wind Knows. In the end, I decided that The Good Wife of Bath was my favourite read for 2021, even though I had said at one point in my wrap-up that What the Wind Knows would be it. I just think that the masterful level of writing in The Good Wife of Bath means it deserves that spot. I then have my genre tracker, so you can see these are all the books and their ratings counting upwards. It was actually 3 more for fantasy, but I ran out of room, so I'm going to have to revise that for next year, or this year. And then you can kind of see which genres I'm reading the most of. So fantasy and historical fiction were the 2 highest, with sci-fi, romance, and general or contemporary coming in sort of equal thirds. And that was, yeah, that was a pretty good breakdown for the year, and I have to say I was surprised in some regards that fantasy was such an enormous landslide win. Next few spreads were pages read, and I found this a really nice way to visually see the length of the books that I'm reading. So I have a couple of spreads going across here, and I know that I did a lot of pages this year, and it was nice to see many months where I maxed out the 500 page count marker. So this doesn't track beyond that, and that was really satisfying to see. The longest book I read this year, I think, was probably the Outlander book I read, An Echo in the Bone, off the top of my head. I then had a Dnf tracker, which I loved. I've drawn all of these myself, just as an FYI, so I don't have any links to give you if you guys want to do something similar, but I thought this was fun, so I drew a tree, and for every DNF, of which there were 4, I did a leaf falling off, and I'm definitely going to do this again next year, because if anything, it was really satisfying to see the tree fill out over the year with all the books that I did finish, and it helps give me a tally of how many books I've touched, if not finished, this year, which would have been 92 in this case, so pretty proud of that. I then did an interesting one to look at time taken, so I had this going down, and this maxes out at 1 month, but I wrote in the numbers below because I had a few that definitely took more than 1 month, and this goes over a few spreads, and I've color coordinated them to show if it was a physical book, an ebook, or an audiobook. You can see every now and again that there's ones that take significantly longer, and to start with, this was trending very much so as being audiobooks that would take longer, but that changed. If I show you the one that I had to add in at the end, then you can see the audiobooks for the final one were much quicker, and that trend sort of died off. And in the end, the longest book, the book that took me the longest to read, was The Lies of Locke Lamora, which took me a full 330 days from start to finish, obviously not reading continuously, which was absolutely mammoth. And the other book that took me a long time was The Memory of Souls, which is the 3rd book, and the Chorus of Dragons series, which took me 160 days to actually complete. So there were some that took a really long time. The next one, I don't think I'm going to do again, but this was my gender tracker. So I wanted to track in Flowers and Bees if it was a male or female main character, because I thought it might give me an idea as to what I'm reading more of, like what books, what gender is most represented in the genres and books that I'm reading, and I thought at the end it would be like a lot of flowers and not a lot of bees, or vice versa, but in the end it's kind of even Stevens. I think there are more flowers than bees, but I didn't really enjoy doing this one, so I don't think I'm going to do it again. Plus it was just a hassle to draw a flower and a bee every time rather than just like colour in a bar graph. So yeah, I'm not going to do this one next year, but it looks chaotically lovely at the end, I suppose. The next one was one that really opened my eyes as to what I'm reading and definitely guided me in my reading goals for 2022, and that was Date Bought versus Read. And so I've got obviously a few spreads for this one, and I've got the books going down and the years. So all of them started in the year I was reading, so this side is 2021, and then all the years back to 2011 go across here. So I could see that like what kind of books I was reading, and predominantly at the beginning of the year I was reading books that I got the previous year, so it looked better, as in I was reading books from 2020, and then it progressively became mostly new releases, so books that a lot of review copies I think they were, as well as just new releases I was buying, or audiobooks, books I've acquired and read within the same year, which is probably a good thing if you don't have a huge backlog, but as I do, I wanted to see more of these books being read. I think this was Eldest, which I acquired in 2014, so I want to see more of these massive TBR veterans actually being ticked off, because there are so few that you can see. 70 was The Potion Diaries, which I got in 2016. There are a lot, like plus 200 books on my shelf that should have long tails like this. So I'm definitely going to be doing this one again next year to see if I can improve the balance between new books and old books that I'm getting to. I then did a queer tracker, and I didn't like this one. This stylistically didn't work for me and I got very bored of it, but I persevered with it. I wanted to track how many queer books I was reading, and I decided to go for a tree again, but I thought my tree was a bit ugly, and I was tracking it with roses for queer characters and just regular leaves for hetero characters. But yeah, this didn't really jump out to me. It's not really super clear as to like the balance between that. I mean, obviously there are fewer roses, but they get really lost within the tree itself. So I want to do something similar again next year, but maybe just more general diversity rather than specifically queer books, but I will be picking some different way to track it, because yeah, I just didn't enjoy doing it that way. And then I just got into my overflow, so all of this is just for the last sort of 20 books or so that didn't fit. So that was my bullet journal tracker. Let me know which pages you really liked, and let me know if you have any other ideas, or if you know any other people that do this who have some really cool spreads that you think I should try out. The next thing I want to look at is my Storygraph statistics. So I have been keeping track on Storygraph, which is an alternative to Goodreads, purely just to have these statistics at the end. They have some really cool things, but in all honesty, I think these graphs are the only bonus thing going for Storygraph over Goodreads. I still am very much so a big fan of Goodreads. So I will try and put up the graphics here so that you can follow along with what I'm looking at. So first and foremost, we have my mood breakdown. I don't really know how much stock to put by this, because it's automatically selected, or however they choose, as to what predominant moods are in a book, and I don't know how much that really reflects how I might determine what the book is myself. But anyway, my biggest one was adventurous, followed by emotional, then mysterious, reflective, and dark, and then they get into some smaller ones. So I thought that was a really interesting combination. I was originally surprised to see adventurous as the main thing coming up there, but then when I thought about it, I suppose a lot of books are quite adventurous. The emotional, dark, and reflective, those ones definitely surprised me a bit, but mysterious was no surprise to me there. When it comes to pace, the largest portion of my books were medium paced, and again, I found this fascinating, and I love that Storygraph does this, because you can look up a book and be like, well, how easy is it to read? And it's largely based off their own determinations as well as user reviews. And I think this is really cool. So we can see that it goes medium, slow, fast in the rankings of how I read. So I'm reading fewer fast books than I am of the bigger books, which felt like an achievement considering how many books I did read in the end. So I found that really interesting to track throughout the year. In terms of page number, my largest portion was those between 300 to 500, which definitely seems about right, with the second highest being those less than 300 and the last being over 500. I'd like to think that I've conquered my fear of big books. I've read a lot this year, and I had a specific goal, I think a couple of years ago, to tackle bigger books and focus on page count over book count. And so they're still never unlikely to be the biggest portion of the books that I read, but I still think with 16% of my books over 500 pages, that's a pretty cool statistic to have. I then had the breakdown of fiction versus non-fiction, so 93% of my reading was fiction and 7% was non-fiction, and that's probably, I want to say that some of my, we've got to be up there with my best sort of split for that, and I think that will only improve as the years go on, because reading more non-fiction is something I'm becoming increasingly interested in, and is one of the genres I've really gotten into this year, really valuing the knowledge that you can get out of nonfiction. When it comes to the genre breakdown, the three biggest genres were fantasy, followed by YA, followed by historical. I don't really classify YA as a genre. It kind of bothers me when people do. It's really just an age bracket. So fantasy is still the winner, and historical, followed by romance and contemporary, which pretty much follows on with what I found in my bullet journal as well. But I was surprised again by how skewed it was towards fantasy, because I feel like I read more broadly than that, but I guess I didn't. In terms of format, I was putting in a lot of effort to actually try and split this up. There was just one book that wasn't accounted for, which I think was a print book, and it wasn't. Storograph wasn't being cooperative, so I couldn't fix that issue. But 19% of my books were audiobooks, 5% were digital, so ebooks, and 76% were print. And I think the audiobook will be the biggest portion. In fact, I would say that this year is going to be the biggest splice of non-physical books that I've ever read, because I did a lot more Kindle reading and I did a lot more audiobooking than I have done in previous years, even though I didn't do that many ebooks. Anyway, I had 4 most read authors this year, and my most read authors just fell within those I read 2 books of, because I don't tend to read a lot of the same author, and I don't follow on series very quickly. So that was Maria V. Snyder, Philippa Gregory, Stephen Fry and Sylvan Newvell were my top 4 authors for 2021. This was then the breakdown of pages versus books read, which I have talked about with my bullet journal as well, and again it's following those same trends with a lot of high page counts every other month towards the latter end of the year, and that massive dip in April where I had all of those DNFs. And my average star rating for this year was 4.15 stars out of 5, with most of my books, or the biggest portion of them, being rated 5 stars, and it's sort of following suit there. They're in from down to the 3-star mark. So those were the statistics that I managed to glean from Storograph, and I thought that was really fun and really informative throughout the year to get a good look at what I was reading. So at the beginning of the year, I also had, let's turn this down, we're getting very bright. I had set myself yearly reading goals, so I want to revisit those goals, similar to the ones I just set myself, and see how I did. So my secret reading goal was to read 75 books. We've discussed this, I will surpass that. I wanted to read all of Colleen Hoover, and I can tell you now that I read 1 book by Colleen Hoover, and this was a lesson learnt that something I'm going to be amending with my TBRs this year, is that I need to factor in and build in these annual reading challenges to my TBR jar system. Otherwise I do not leave myself enough room to accommodate for them, and they simply don't get done. So that is something that I want to change, and hopefully will mean that going forwards I'll hit a few more of my annual challenges. I wanted to read the Goodreads Choice Award predictions, and because I had pre-ordered a bunch of them and I wanted to read them throughout the year, so I'd read more of them. As much as I was more involved and read a few of them, I actually don't think I did very well with this. I would say the majority of them that came in fact, I did indeed write them down. So these are the ones I pre-ordered and was hoping to read so that I would have something to talk about when the Goodreads Choice Awards came out. So I had Winterkeep, which I didn't read. Fireheart Tiger, I did. The Iron Raven, I did not. Son of the Storm, I did. The Ones We're Meant to Find, I did. The Gilded Ones, I did not. The Unbroken, I did not. And Lore, I did not. So I read 3 out of 8, so it's not like a total fail, but it also wasn't particularly good, so I'm not going to count that one as a win. I wanted to read all of my arcs as they came in, and this got out of hands come April. April was my stumbling block for review copies. And I was really disappointed with that, because I had such great plans to be on track with it this year, but after I pretty much organised all of my review copies in terms of NetGalley and what I requested and how much I was going to request in about March, and then I didn't read much at all in April, and it really put me disastrously on the back foot, and I just didn't catch up. So the whole year was quite stressful trying to catch up with arcs. I even did arc August, and on the whole that didn't feel like it really helped. So going into 2022, this goal has pretty much been revised to request few to no review copies this year to give myself more breathing room. I then had the goal to read my Christmas presents from 2020, and I actually think I could say I failed this goal as well, because out of like the many I had, I only read 3. There was close to 20, I think, and yeah, December was a weird reading month that was very successful, but I didn't get around to my TBR for a really long time. However, for my other goal, which was to read my birthday presents from 2020, I did really well, and I read I think about half, if not more, in May, and I was really pleased with that effort. I had a great reading month, so I am honestly really proud of the effort that went in May to meet that goal. That was fantastic, but unfortunately didn't manage to repeat keep that for December. And I wanted to participate in Tome Topple, but Tome Topple didn't happen this year when I thought it was going to, so those plans did not work out. So all in all, my reading goals for 2021 weren't very well met, and I think that was for a lack due to a lack of foresight and foreplanning. There was another statistic I wanted to do for you guys, which was how many books I bought versus how many books I read. But I actually don't know the easiest way to count this up. So I'm hoping that next year, at the end of 2022, I can keep a record to give you this tally, but I know without a doubt that I bought way more books than I read, which is quite scary. So if I can work out that statistic at some point, I might share it on Instagram or on my blog, but without going through every book haul that I've put up this year, which I could do, and counting them, I haven't been tracking it very well, so maybe that's something I'll include in my bullet journal next year, is tracking all the books that I bought. So that brings me to the end of my yearly wrap-up for 2021. I am really pleased, generally speaking, how my reading went. A little bit disappointed in not meeting my reading goals, but not all that surprised. I think I knew from just a few months in that it just wasn't going to happen. But let me know in the comments down below what you think about how I went for my reading year, and other than that, I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.